guys, welcome back to Who, What, Where, a true crime podcast. We're your hosts, Caitlin,
Hannah,
and Abigail.
If you've never listened before, just know this is a very chatty girls' night sleepover type podcast. We will speculate and theorize a lot, so if that's not your jam, we totally understand. But if it is, you can tune in every Monday for a full-length episode, and then come back every Friday for a Freaky Fast Friday episode, where we give you the rundown on a case, sometimes unsolved, always freaky, in 30 minutes or less. This week, we are covering a case that involves the murders of two children. So just be forewarned, like, I know that's a trigger warning for literally everybody, but if it's especially triggering, go ahead and click off now. You probably won't want to hear this story. I kind of hate covering stories where, like, little children were killed, especially by their mothers, like, in this week's case, like...
I mean, just as a side note, too, like, even in TV and shows and movies, that's, like, a line that they don't cross, usually. Like, they don't cross that line of killing children. Like, it's interesting because in the media, it's, like, so unfathomable to, like, watch a TV show where a child dies. But then in, like, real, true crime, like we're talking about today, or in this entire podcast, actually, it happens all the time. So yeah, I get what you're saying. It's horrible, but it's just that's always been something that's interesting to me, that in movies they won't cross that line, but in real life,
well, and there's something like an added layer of, like, disgust that I get when the perpetrator was, like, the mother of the children, you know?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It's just, like, a whole nother level of, like, repulsive, I guess, like, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, because they're the people that are supposed to love them the most and
protect them.
Yeah.
Well, and, like, a normal person, from a normal person's perspective, that's, like, so morally wrong, because, like, it's so ingrained in us to protect our children. But I think most of the time there is some serious personality disorders that women suffer from that cause them to harm their children. Because think about it, like, at a biological level, like, women or mothers, I guess, are, like, programmed to, like, protect their children. So anytime, like, they stray from that, it's actually, like, hard to look at. And I think it'd be even harder to look at if I had children. That's why I kind of wanted to give that trigger warning. Like, I think for people with children, like, it's especially hard to look at cases like this where a mother hurt her children, you know?
Well, and I think that's a good point that you brought up. I mean, obviously we don't have sympathy for these people, or we're not forgiving them for what they've done, but bringing up the fact that there's, like, most likely something, like, genetically wrong with these people, like some kind of
or, like,
psychologically or something, because I mean, even if you don't end up becoming a mother yourself, which is that's your own choice, but there's something biologically, like, in you that is meant to nurture people, I feel like.
Well, yeah, because, like, if for no other reason other than evolutionary wise, yeah. And I know that's, like, extremely off topic, kind of. Well, it's not off topic,
no,
but
that was pretty on topic. We did an okay job. That was just an intro for what you guys are in for
I know. I feel like we're... Go ahead.
I was gonna say, while we're off topic, it makes me think of, in, like, the originals, which is, like, the Vampire Diaries spinoff, they, like, don't harm children because, like, that's, like, Marcel's, like, one rule is no children should be harmed.
See, I mean, even in a show like that, which is, like, completely fiction, right? Like,
right.
So,
like, vampires, werewolves.
Right. It's just interesting. It's like a line, and even this is actually off topic, but even in TV shows, they don't usually hurt animals. And it's the same thing. It's like a line that at some point in time, someone said, okay, I don't care if this is fake. We're not going to hurt children or animals.
I think it's, like, a moral thing. Like, a sane person, it hurts our heart when a child or an animal gets harmed. And that's, like, at the, like, core of our being. I don't really think that's, like, a society thing. I think that's, like, evolutionary and just, like, morally, you know what I mean?
Well,
Yeah, and
and
I think
it's a pretty cross-cultural concept that
Yes,
children
exactly.
children are innocent.
mhm.
Like
Oh, okay.
most religions and cultures, they all have like some version of like a very similar idea that children are born innocent and they like are incapable of sin until like a
Mhm.
whatever age, you know? And that's very much like a religious aspect of it, but like a friend and I were actually talking about how like Scientologists in the Scientology church, they consider children like at like age 4 to be capable of like mortal sin or whatever,
Mhm.
Which is not normal.
which is unlike most other religions and most other
Yes,
cultures.
exactly.
So
That's what I
Mhm.
mean.
Well, and also I'll say one last thing and then we can actually move on to the case. But I think a lot of it too, especially in like nonfiction or no fiction. I always get those confused, nonfiction and fiction.
fiction
Fiction,
fake.
fake, nonfiction, not fake. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So in fiction, in TV shows and movies and everything, it's also almost like the, I think naturally, obviously, you don't think about children like being hurt unless you're obviously messed up in the head. And so naturally, like writers and directors and producers of movies, they don't think, oh yeah, that's going to be a major part of the storyline that this kid gets like severely injured or killed or murdered or whatever.
Yeah, almost like it doesn't even come up in
Yeah.
like their ideas or
Like once
like
they're 15, it's fair game. But for some reason, I mean, I'm not serious. Like I'm not saying 15 specifically, but you know what I mean. It's
no,
like
you're
we
right.
have some number in our head that you wouldn't really be able to explain it, but you would just know, oh yeah, that's not that weird,
It's
right?
like kind of an indeterminable you know what I mean? Indeterminable?
Indeterminable.
Indeterminable. Oh, this week on words we don't know or words we can't
It's
pronounce.
gonna just be like a recurring bit.
Yeah, this is our shout out to Thomas.
Yeah, one of our
Thanks for
most
listening
loyal
every week.
watchers and listeners. Yep.
He really enjoys that we are ultimately blondes.
Stupid. Yeah.
Yeah,
We literally
seriously.
don't know, like very common
Like
sayings.
very common phrases.
And I do that all the time. It's like I know I've heard someone say this phrase like 12 times. And so it comes to my head, but then I'm like, what the I
Or
don't
you,
know what I'm trying
yeah,
to say right now.
yeah, you know, like when you
So
like say
weird.
something and then you're like, is that a word? And everybody's like, yeah, or no. Like,
Or like my favorite thing is seeing that you've said or people asking, "Oh, what do you call this?" And then you call it whatever you call it. And then everyone's like, "It's actually called this. You just been pronouncing it like slightly incorrectly." And you're like,
Okay,
"What?" My
weird
whole life has
example
been
of
a
that,
lie.
but like a word that I've pronounced wrong my entire life and fairly recently realized. So like epitome, Epitome.
hmm
I up until pretty recently would always read it in a book as epitome.
Well,
And I didn't realize they were the same word.
So
wasn't that like a
sometimes I
thing
do
in
that.
high school that like they would always say epitome? Like,
What
I
high
remember
school?
I
Yeah,
remember
where
Just
you
did you
kidding.
telling
go?
me, I remember you telling me that Arnsey would say epitome.
Oh, maybe
Or
Yeah,
you
probably
actually.
said
because Caitlin
epitome in
said
his
something to
class.
him.
I
I
think
wonder
you
if
said epitome and he made fun of you or something like that.
okay, my head is clearly blocking out that traumatic event, so
Super
because I don't
Yeah,
remember
repressed.
that,
that's
but
fair. Um,
okay. We may need to end the
right.
divergent topic of conversation.
So
You said
Or
you
we're
wanted
gonna risk
chatty
I
more,
know.
chatty
We're gonna
intro.
risk like turning into one of those podcasts though.
do we even remember what I was trying to say?
You were talking about you said indeterminable.
Is that a word?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Maybe.
So I feel like the age is indeterminable as far as like when a child becomes an adult, and it's kind of like dependent on what you're talking about, but like murder, I feel like it feels wrong anyways, so it's extra hard to determine that age, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into it. So So Susan Lee Vaughn was born September 26, 1971. I believe this makes her a Virgo. I could be wrong.
Asking the important questions.
Asking the
26th?
important. I think that's the end of Virgo season.
No, 26th is in the next season.
Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure because John is a Libra.
Ooh, she is a Libra.
Oh no.
Do with that what you will. I'm just kidding.
No,
Anyway.
that is one of the phrases the other day. I could not freaking find out what I was supposed to say. Do with it what you will. Do with that what you will. Is that what you said?
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's a Libra.
Okay, just checking because now I will note that that's how you say that.
Do with that what you
You
will.
have like a notepad next to you and you're actually writing down a note. I love it. Okay.
No, Caitlin,
Anyway,
the reason I knew was because he who shall not be named was a Virgo and John is a Libra. Like, and they're like only like a month apart, so I thought that was
Well,
funny.
so Virgos are very type A, which would actually kind of make sense for Susan Smith, but I don't know that much about Libras.
Wait, is her
Okay.
name Susan Smith or Susan Vaughn?
She was born Susan Vaughn.
Okay.
Yeah. So she was born in Union, South Carolina. Her parents were often violent, like with each other, and shortly after their inevitable divorce, her father committed suicide. So Susan's mother very quickly remarried a man. There was actually like suspicion that she had been with him the whole time. But there was like suspicion of that, which makes sense. And this new man actually sexually abused Susan while she was a teenager. So coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, he was a member of the Christian Coalition chapter that was in the area. A Time article actually claims that the sexual relationship, whatever capacity it was, like abuse, or maybe at this point it was like weirdly consensual, even though I don't even think it can be consensual if he essentially, what's the word for that, where they like,
He's in a position of power.
No, like when you're a kid and they
Statutory?
No, and they like wait till you're an adult to have a sexual relationship
That's
with you, but
not grooming.
Grooming.
That's what
grooming.
I said, yeah.
I don't know why I couldn't think of the word.
Grooming.
Anyway, like I guess at that point it like could it really be consensual because it was definitely grooming.
She had been
but
groomed,
anyway, they had a sexual relationship as like when Susan was an adult, like up until around 6 months before the murders. Which is very interesting, and I'm sure like psychologically was not great for a woman like Susan, as you'll find out later. So Susan graduated high school in 1989, and by the time that she had graduated, I don't know how I want to phrase that. Okay, I'm starting that over. So Susan graduated high school in 1989 and attempted suicide for the second time in her life after a married man she had been having an affair with ended things. This is like freshly 18 Susan Smith.
Oh, God.
She married David Smith in 1991, and they had 2 sons between their multiple separations. Like, they were constantly off and on. So it's honestly a miracle she got pregnant by him and not somebody else. Their relationship was often plagued by accusations of infidelity, but it's also my understanding that they actually were infidel?
I don't know if that's the word.
I don't think that's the word.
Where
they were not faithful to
not
each other.
faithful, yeah.
Yeah. So according to history.com, they often use their children as like pawns in their relationship, and she in some ways like used them as an excuse for them to not separate because she, in the end, she didn't want to be alone, you know? In the end, it seemed Susan was in an extramarital relationship with a man who did not want kids, and Susan planned to get rid of the ones she already had in order to be with this man.
Yikes. So straight up, this girl has some deeply rooted issues with like marriage and infidelity. Well, I would say men, but I think a lot of this stems from the fact that think about it, honestly, if her mom was being unfaithful to her father, she would probably have
And that
known about
caused
it.
her
And
father
then
to
her
like
father
kill
killed
himself. Yeah.
himself. I mean, imagine. Like, I understand that I mean, I don't understand, but it's pretty clear to me that that's where her issues are coming from. It's
Mm-hmm.
not even much of a stretch, really. Like, it's pretty much straightforward, you know?
Oh,
So,
totally. Well, and you'll find out later she had she was eventually diagnosed with called
something.
dependent personality disorder.
Okay.
Um and I'll get to that later. It's in my notes like later, but so on October 25th, 1994, Susan Smith called the police and reported that an African American man had carjacked her while her children were inside and had fled with the children. So she, like, I don't remember where she was at this point. For some reason, I didn't write it down. But she, like, called the police and was like, yeah, like, I was at this intersection. There happened to be no witnesses, like, lucky for me. And this African American guy came up and like took my kids basically. For days she actually made like teary-eyed like emotional appearances on local news, pleading for the return of they were 3 years old and 14 months old. It was two boys. Detectives working on the case very from the start like figured there was something fishy with her story.
Mm-hmm.
On day 3, Susan and her estranged husband, David, both took polygraph tests. As far as I know, like, nothing crazy came out of it. The detectives were actually hopeful in the beginning that the boys were still alive and she had, like, hid them, or
Mm-hmm.
they were just really hoping that they'd find them before they died, essentially, because, I mean, even by a couple days in, we know that, like, the first 40, or is it the first 24 hours for kids?
I think it's the first, somewhere between, like, it's basically like the first 3 days. If you don't find
Yeah,
them in that, like,
they're
the chance that
probably,
you're gonna
yeah.
find them alive goes down by almost like 100%. Like, it's pretty much no
Yeah.
chance left. So, I mean,
So
also, so the kind of annoying part, but also kind of a good part about this, I guess. I don't know anything about this case either, but I'm assuming that she was lying. But my
well, yeah, she was.
but my point that I'm trying to make here is I'm annoyed that she said an African American man, because it's almost like she thought in her mind, okay, well, the police will believe me if I say it was an African American man. And so then on the flip side of that, I'm glad that the police are like, no, this leaves a little fishy. And they didn't just take it with like, oh, well, it was an African American man. It must be true. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
definitely. Yeah.
I don't know if that
S-
made sense, but
Well, and like I said, they were very um questioning of her whole story from like the very
hmm
beginning. They're like, this seems like a little bit too good to be true for you,
yeah.
because like again, we can't find any evidence of where this man was. You just happened to be at a intersection with no other people around when
Right,
this
which is
happened.
weird. I mean,
Um
even just like someone that lived on that street, you would think would have seen something if it did happen. We know obviously it didn't.
yeah. Well, and so during like these first couple days, like when Susan was still standing by her story,
Uh-huh.
the investigators actually like they searched all the nearby lakes and ponds, because I mean, they were, if the boys were dead, they like figured they'd find some kind of evidence, right?
Mm-hmm.
They actually at one point looked in the John D. Long Lake where the bodies were actually at this time. So like they later found them there, but it's a bit of a story. They made the mistake of assuming that the car would be sunk pretty near the shore,
Mm-hmm.
especially if somebody had just like pushed it in there.
Yeah.
And they actually didn't look any further than like 30 feet from the shore.
Oh my
Like
gosh.
they honestly just didn't look far enough. Like they didn't do the whole lake, which makes sense, I guess, in essence. But it actually turns out that Smith had done honestly too good of a job concealing evidence, and the car had actually made it over 120 feet from the shore. Like it had drifted that far.
Wow.
And I think she kind of started to get like cold feet I guess if that's like what you would call it, because she was kind of waiting for them to find the evidence so she could be like, oh my God, like, and play distraught. Because as soon as they found it, I don't think they would have been able to pin it on her, other than the fact that there wasn't a driver in the car, you know? It was just like the two boys in their car seats in the back. So like, I'm not really sure what her plan was, but I'm assuming she started to sweat a little bit when they didn't immediately find the car in the lake that she planted it in. Like,
Random
after,
little side note.
yeah.
Putin is a Libra, as well as Kim Kardashian, Eminem, Will Smith, and Confucius. Like,
I love that we're keeping it kind of
Confucius
lighthearted.
from like history. Like,
He was a philosopher.
yeah, he
I just thought
was a
it was,
Libra.
honestly, my first thought was, it's some rapper that's trying to be like quirky with their name.
No, I
So
was just
shows
looking
that-
at my Google search, and it tells you like who is like Libra celebrities and like
Interesting.
all of that.
I love it.
Yeah, Julie Andrews. Anyways, continue.
So after like 9 days, I believe it was like day 9 or 10, Smith finally broke and admitted everything. She said that she had driven it was a burgundy Mazda, I believe, up to the shore of the lake. Like, it's kind of, if you look at pictures, it's like, it's sort of like a boat launch, but like not really. It's literally just like grass going right up to the water's edge. So there's not like a beach or anything. It's really weird. Or there's like a little bit of a beach, but not really. And she drove it up to the edge of the lake and just rolled it into the water. And her two sons were just strapped into their car seats.
Oh my God.
The biggest breakthrough of the case, other than Susan's like straight up confession,
Yeah.
was they were able to prove that she was involved in some way, because apparently like the intersection that she had claimed there were no other people at, but that she had stopped at a red light, and that's when she got carjacked. They like determined that it was like impossible that the light would have turned red if there was no other people in the intersection, because, you know, like there's like some kind of trigger that triggers it. So like when a car pulls up on the intersecting street, the street turns red, and they're like, if there was nobody else around, your light would have been green. So your two stories conflict a little bit, like
So
the two
they
parts of that conflict.
They determined that it wasn't a timed intersection. Like, it had to have the sensor triggered.
Yeah, they were
Okay.
like, this is really unlikely, that basically your story doesn't add up, and that makes you look suspicious. Because in any case like this, like, I feel like you automatically look suspicious if you are lying in any way. Like, you no longer are the grieving mother if you start lying in any way, in my opinion. Unless it's like a case where it's like, oh, it was clearly an accident, but lying about what happened to your children, that's definitely like makes you look suspicious. Like, there's no way around it. You look suspicious. But again,
also, I feel like that's a tactic, sort of, that
totally.
that the investigators will use. Like, I don't know if you guys watched, this is not anything related to this case, but if you guys watched the Chris Watts documentary on Netflix.
I haven't watched it yet. It just, it grosses, like, not grosses.
So that's I mean, I guess
out.
that's kind of is similar to this case in that it involves children. So anyway, I mean,
it's rough.
It is a rough documentary. I cried through like half of it, but the point is with that case, it was very similar, where everyone was like, dude, this guy is sketchy, but they weren't like, they had no proof, right? They just knew that he was being sketchy. But then
and you can't arrest people for being sketchy.
Yeah, and then there's an entire like questioning portion where, like, if you don't watch anything else from it, you could just watch that, because it reminds me of what you're talking about, where it's like they know they're being sketchy, and so they none of them were lining up, and so like, well, we're just gonna tell him, dude, we know you're lying, even if they don't know for sure. You know, it's a really popular tactic, I think, in cases.
Yeah,
like
because
this.
as soon as people feel like they might be caught,
yeah,
especially if they're not like a hardened criminal, they might start to be like, okay, how can I get out of this? You know,
how can I basically lessen my punishment? I think too is like the first thing that comes to their mind as well.
Well, and it can also like reveal any like guilty conscience too. It seems like that can kind of come out of that as well. So
Yeah.
So this case obviously received considerable backlash once it was revealed that the story about the black man carjacking a white woman in broad daylight and taking her two young sons was actually a huge lie. Like, people
Yeah.
were really fired up about
Just
that
like
for
I was
obvious reasons.
saying. Yeah.
Well, and not to mention they were in the South, and like it there was so much racial tension when they realized, like, oh my God, like, she accused a black, like, this white woman accused a black man, like, we don't really like the sound of that. But also, like, there was no clear motive for why Susan would have done this. Like, initially there was absolutely no motive because, again, like, sure, her and her husband were really estranged, but if she didn't want to care for the children anymore, like, I'm
Well, and at this
she could
point,
have
no
given
one,
them to her husband, you know?
yeah, and at this point, no one knows about the boyfriend or whatever that doesn't want
No.
children, right?
No.
That comes up later. Okay.
Well, and so
That's a
the thing
big motive. I mean,
is,
that to me
yeah.
sounds like the only motive, really. But anyway.
Yeah, well, and like it's weird because so Susan is very adamant that this was indeed not the reason. She was just like, I think she claims that she was going through like severe emotional distress and she was severely depressed and whatever. But in the trial, I'm getting off topic. I'm going to try to stay on like like this pace that I was going with, but so in a 2015 letter that Susan wrote from jail, she claimed it hurt her to hear that people thought she had killed her sons to be with a man. Like, even she, because my first thought when seeing this, I was like, I just can't imagine anybody in their right mind killing children for a guy.
Well, she's not in her right mind.
Well, I guess, yeah, that's true.
I mean, that would be what I would
Um,
say to that. That's kind of my.
but
But
she,
I
like,
get what you're
you know,
saying.
she basically was like, I am like so hurt that people thought I did this for a man. Like, she
Right.
claimed, she actually, like, in her words, basically said that there was little thought process at all, and the choice to roll her car into the lake was, she didn't make it in her right mind, and it was very, like, spur of the moment. And she also claims that she had initially, and she said a lot of this in court as well. This was like,
Uh-huh.
she wrote this letter like years later after she'd already been in jail, and she was just kind of reiterating all of her side of the story because
Right.
this case gained a lot of popularity.
Mm-hmm.
But she actually claimed that she had initially planned on killing herself. Like, there was like a time when she was going to get in the car and go in the lake with them, or between the time that the boys died and the time that she was revealed as the murderer, she was going to kill herself. Or she had lots of different stories, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
So during the trial in 1995, the defense's story was pretty much exactly this. They claimed Smith was, quote, deeply troubled, and she suffered from severe depression, which is true. For the most part, this seems to have, like, there's, like, notable points in her life where you could point to she has major depressive disorder.
Mm-hmm.
She had attempted suicide twice, and it seemed like her constant issues with her relationships with men in her life kind of contributed to her depression. Like, it kind of just
Yeah.
like fed on it a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
especially once it was revealed that she had dependent personality disorder. So she was constantly looking for emotional and psychological dependence, or I guess gratification from other people.
Mm-hmm.
So Judy Clark, one of Smith's lawyers, said in court, quote, "This is not a case about evil. This is a case about despair and sadness." They're basically saying, like, Susan Smith was, like,
Not
deeply
in her right
troubled,
mind.
deeply depressed, right? And I think that's, like, the thing is, like, that was pretty much their only hope as far as getting her acquitted, because I guess, like, that's, like, one of the only reasonable, and obviously it's not reasonable, but it's, like, in my head, I could almost see that. Like, she's really depressed, and she sees no out in life, and she, I could
Well,
almost
yeah,
see
I
that.
mean,
If
yeah,
she had, like, but she didn't even follow through with committing suicide, like, and that would have made more sense for her story than for me
well, and so
personally,
that's what I
but
was just thinking. I was like, yeah, I get it, whatever. She's saying all this stuff to kind of make herself look better. But then it's like, well, why? I mean, you still made the decision, whether or not you were in your right mind or not, to let the car go into the lake with your children in it, right? And
Yeah.
so, and I think that you're right that that was the jury's, not the jury, but the prosecution, not the prosecution, the defense. Oh my God. That was the defense's only case, really, was to say, okay, I get it. There's no way to excuse someone murdering their own children, but she was as close to basically, I mean, I think of like postpartum depression kind
Yeah,
of in this.
but yeah.
I mean, she's not postpartum necessarily like in that manner, but
I think there wasn't as many like characteristics of postpartum depression because postpartum depression is more or less like a what's the word? Like an insane
like a
state. Like
biological,
she
yeah.
well, and it's my understanding that she wouldn't have made up this crazy story about what actually happened to the kids if she had postpartum depression. She would have just killed them, and then when somebody finally was like, "Where are your kids?" she would have been like,
I
"Oh,
killed
well, I
them.
killed them."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like she knew, that's
Because
another
it like
part about it.
separates you from it, kind of.
That's another thing too, is that she, I mean, obviously she knew it was wrong and that's why she lied.
Mhm.
And I think that that is a big contender on why, like, for example, I don't really care what she says about, oh,
Yeah,
well,
same.
I meant to kill myself, or I was going to jump in the car with him, whatever. I'm like, no, well, if you did, honestly, wouldn't you not have lied? That's what I think. Wouldn't
Well,
you have
and
just said like what you just said, where as soon
there
as
is
someone
like
figured something out? I
there
don't
is
know.
clear malicious intent when
Once
she
you start
decided to like
lying,
lie. Uh-huh.
exactly. Yeah.
And the DSM does define dependent personality disorder as someone who requires constant support of others to meet their emotional and physical needs. And it also says that very few people with dependent personality disorder ever learn to be independent in their psychological well-being. Like, it's almost impossible for somebody to reach a point where like they aren't dependent on others. Like most people don't.
Interesting. I've never heard of that
Yeah.
disorder, personality disorder. Interesting.
Unfortunately, the version of events, I guess more fortunately, honestly, the version of events that the defense brought up of her being extremely depressed and despair, I guess, didn't sway the jury. The prosecution's, like, their version of events, which was more or less the true version of events, was that she intentionally murdered her children to be in a relationship with a man who was not actually her current husband anyway.
Yeah.
Susan Smith's stepfather, Beverly Russell, also testified during the trial that he had sexually abused her as a teenager.
Oh
I
God.
can't remember if he was invited there by the prosecution or the defense. I would assume the defense brought him to kind of solidify their point of her mental state, but
Yeah.
it is worth mentioning, I feel like, that at least on biography.com it says Republican Party and Christian Coalition leader Beverly Russell. Like that's what they like say his name as.
Like his title.
Take with that. Yeah, like it was weird that they mentioned that, I guess, but the jury only deliberated for 2.5 hours on this, on whether
Wow.
or not she was guilty. So the lead prosecutor on the case actually argued heavily for Susan to get the death penalty, but she ended up not getting it. She was eventually sentenced to life in prison, and she will be eligible for parole. She won't get it, in my opinion, but she's technically eligible in November 2024. I think this part might be interesting to talk about, like, why she didn't get the death penalty, but Lisa Montgomery did. Like, what do we think, like, the difference is? I know it's, like, a federal versus a state crime. There is that difference, which is, like, a significant difference, but because you guys remember that Lisa Montgomery, she crossed state lines, and so it automatically became, like,
Yeah.
like a federal case.
Which I get like the way that the reason that we do it that way, if you cross state lines and it going to federal court immediately, but like the crimes are the same essentially. Like it's such a minor difference.
Well, and the details are not the same, but like the
I mean, like,
severity,
if
like
she had crossed state lines versus if she hadn't. Like, that's
it's
what I
just
mean. Hmm.
somebody like Susan Smith having, not that she'll get parole, but having the potential to get parole, while somebody who like Lisa Montgomery, who quite frankly was failed in court, like her defense failed to present a lot of evidence that probably would have not exonerated her, but given her life instead of the death penalty.
Mm-hmm.
Like just that is, it doesn't sit right with me. Like it's very, I don't know.
So I mean, I think the parallel you're drawing is not. I mean, you're kind of making it sound like it's not at all the same, but really,
But the
it
crimes
is.
themselves aren't the same, I
The
guess is
crime
like,
itself isn't the same, but I think that what I see is two very, very deeply troubled women with like horrible pasts and
Exactly.
and acting in a way that obviously wasn't right, and we're not justifying it at all. But I think that comparing the two is, in this case, interesting to kind of think about, because why was Lisa Montgomery given the death penalty? I don't want to try to get into like whether or not I believe in the death penalty, just period, point blank. But I don't necessarily. I think in both cases, the defense should have done a better job, I guess, in pleading insanity. Like both of
in
the,
both or
I think in both. Yeah, I mean, so Susan Smith was I kind of talked about this already, but I think that maybe she was having like an insane or panicked episode or whatever when it actually happened. But then when she took that step and started lying about it instead of just like coming clean, I think that's where it kind of crosses the line where, okay, maybe you were having like this insane episode when it happened, but you crossed the line basically by lying about it. If she would have just been upfront about it, then I feel like that would be different. But then in a case like Lisa Montgomery, if I remember correctly, basically as soon as the police came to her, she was like, "Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I killed the woman to take her baby," basically.
mm-hmm,
Right? And
mm-hmm.
so that's more of like a very cut and dry, like mental health kind of case. And then
But that's the thing, like her Lisa Montgomery's defense like didn't even broach the topic of insanity.
so
And
yeah.
again, the insanity plea is fairly hard to get. There has to be like clear evidence that the person didn't understand, either didn't understand what they're doing or didn't understand like the consequences of what they were doing. So like for example, they're like, "Oh, I killed them so they could be in a better place because Satan possessed me." If a psychiatrist deemed that they truly believed that, that'd be an insanity plea. In Lisa Montgomery's case, I'm not saying that she could have gotten the insanity plea, but I think that her defense lawyers failed where Susan Smith's defense lawyers did well, in that
Yeah.
they used her past and like her severe mental. Susan Smith is, it's like a little bit different but kind of the same. Like they both had severe mental disorders,
Mm-hmm.
and those should have been evident when deciding on how to sentence them. And in Lisa Montgomery's case, I think
It
those weren't
wasn't.
presented
Yeah.
in court, and so the court wasn't able to use that when they were deciding her sentence, you know? So like they weren't even given the option to look at that and give her a sentence that like reflected that, you know? And in
Yeah.
Susan Smith's case, her defense did essentially what they should have done, quote unquote. Not to say that, like, obviously Susan Smith is a fucking terrible person. She murdered her children, but her defense lawyers were pretty, quote unquote, good in that they brought up this idea that she
Mm-hmm.
had serious mental health issues, and that probably positively influenced
Oh
her
yeah. I
sentence.
100% agree
So,
with you.
And
in
they didn't do that with Lisa.
I
in
agree.
my opinion, Lisa, just from what you've like the facts you've said so far, Lisa seemed like far more unaware of like
Yeah.
the weight of what she was doing, and she's the one that got murdered, essentially.
I mean,
Mhm.
honestly, I think kind of what you're saying is it's almost like it should have been switched. Like, it's
Yes,
almost
I
like
completely
Lisa
believe.
Montgomery should have had the defense attorney that
If
Susan Smith had.
if
Yeah.
somebody's gonna get the death penalty out of the two, I feel like it should have been
Well,
Susan.
and I didn't want to bring this up for us to be like one or the other deserved the death penalty. I wasn't trying to go
I
there.
think
It was more
neither
just
I
did,
think
but
neither,
that's
but
me not believing in the death
yeah,
penalty.
but I think, Caitlin, I think what you guys are both saying actually is basically, if Lisa Montgomery would have had the defense that Susan Smith had, she would not have gotten the death penalty,
It would be
which
alive.
I 100% agree with. I would agree
Yeah.
with that statement. I think that, but I do also think that the cases are different.
Yeah. Well,
You know,
definitely. I thought it was like it's one of the only women that we've talked about so far, really. So
Mhm.
it was just I thought it'd be like an interesting
Well,
comparison.
and it's frustrating too thinking about that now, especially because we're not trying to downplay either of their crimes or anything, but I wish that Susan like wouldn't have had such a good defense, almost because hers,
I mean,
like I said,
I
it was almost like hers was so much more thought out. Like, she knew full well what she was doing. Yeah, she had a lot of mental issues, but like I said,
yeah.
when she crossed the line and she started lying about it, that's when
Yeah.
it was like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I trust you anymore,
Mhm.
I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, and so I thought this would be an interesting time to bring up a case that is like even more, not that Lisa's is even similar. I guess this is a case that's like eerily similar to Susan Smith. It happened about 10 years prior. But this is the Diane Downs case. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this one.
Mm-mm.
She is one of the most like prominent like killer mothers like that are out there. Like, she's like kind of one of the big names that I feel like I've always known about in true crime. So it's like her name gets brought up a lot.
Yeah.
So a little bit of background on her. She was born in Diane Downs was born in 1955 to parents who were not much better than Smiths. Her father allegedly sexually abused her, and she claimed to be quote afraid of her mother. Like, she told friends and family often that she was like afraid of her. So there might be some like psychological trauma there.
Yeah.
On May 19th, 1983. So yeah, just short of 10 years, I think, or a little bit more than 10 years before Susan Smith. Diane Downs shot her 3 children in the car and drove them in a blood-splattered car to Mackenzie Willamette Hospital in Springfield, Oregon. Upon arrival, Cheryl, age 7, was already dead. Danny, aged 3, was paralyzed from the waist down. And Christy, aged 8, had suffered a disabling stroke. So her story was eerily similar to Smith's about what happened. She said that a man had carjacked her and shot her children. How
But
she
not
was still in
her.
the car, I don't know that she had an explanation for that.
Oh my
but
God. Yeah, this is even worse than Susan's thing. What I mean, like, why didn't they shoot her? What? That's
like
so weird.
well, so no, she was shot. Sorry, did I not? I don't think I said
Oh,
that.
no.
Her arm. She had like a bullet in her arm.
So did she shoot herself?
Yeah.
That's freaking crazy.
Yeah,
Okay.
spoiler alert, it wasn't some random guy.
So premeditation.
I mean, I could expect that just because.
Well, and so
similar.
much like the police from Susan Smith's case, the hospital employees that were like working on her and her kids and like helping her, they were like really suspicious because apparently she was like relatively calm, especially for somebody who had allegedly just been shot and had just driven her children as they bled out to the hospital. Nonetheless, she was not arrested until 9 months after the incident, by which time she had given birth to another child, actually.
Oh my God.
She had conceived it probably shortly before, and she
I
had
was
given birth to
gonna
another child
say,
who was
9
later
months-
adopted.
I was gonna say 9 months is long enough to have a baby.
Yeah. The prosecutors in court offered up the theory that Diane had attempted to kill her children. Again, weirdly similar, in order to be with a man named Robert Knickerbocker. That's going to be really hard to say for it to not say Knickerbocker. Anyway, Robert, an old flame from Arizona. So she lived in Arizona. She met David Smith in Arizona, and they moved to Oregon. But when they lived in Arizona, she was having an extramarital affair with Robert.
Caitlin, you said, her husband's name is also David Smith?
No, I don't think I mentioned her husband's name. It's not really relevant. She's married, but...
You said David. Were you talking about Susan for a second? Yeah.
I said her husband's name was David?
No, you said something about she married David and then she in Arizona and something about Arizona.
Oh, did I? Here, let me look up what her husband's name is.
Because I just didn't want that.
For some reason, I didn't write it down.
Because now we've talked about a few different names, so I don't want it to be confusing.
Steve. His name was Steve. Anyway, yeah, his name was Steve. They got divorced I think their divorce finalized a couple years after the crime. Or wait, no, did that say 1980? Maybe they were divorced. It's not necessarily important. I was more just trying to
set the scene.
Well, I know I was trying to show the similarities in these cases that are kind of fucking weird. Oh yeah, so her and Steve were divorced by this point. Anyway, she had this flame in Arizona before she moved to Oregon. And at the time she was still married when she was having a relationship with him. And this is the reason that the prosecutors claimed that she had killed her children or attempted to kill all of her children. She only successfully, very heavy quotes, killed one of them, but the other two had lifelong disabilities, I think, because of their injuries. So her surviving daughter, Christy, who at this point was 9, also testified in the trial about the details of her mother, basically pulling up on this dirt road, shooting her and her siblings, and then shooting herself in the arm and slowly driving towards the hospital. I actually read something that was there was witnesses that said that she, even though Diane claimed she had raced to the hospital, they said that they saw her driving down the road going less than 10 miles an hour.
That makes me
because
so mad.
She was, yeah.
Well, and that's so obvious too.
Yeah.
I feel, and again, this is kind of similar to when Susan started lying about it. I'm that's where you made the kind of point, to me at least, that you knew exactly what you were doing.
Well,
right?
And that's the thing, she had to have known she would eventually get caught because the blood splatter was pretty inconsistent. And they eventually found a gun in her possession because multiple people are yeah, she owns a gun, and she owns the same kind of gun that the kids were shot with and she was shot with. Anyway, she was gonna get got eventually, but so she was convicted on one count of she was eventually convicted on 1 count of murder and 2 counts each of attempted murder and criminal assault. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years. She, again, is technically eligible for parole, or she was in 2020. I'm assuming she wasn't granted it. She has had a couple parole hearings. She had one in 2010, where there was a guy that wrote a letter. I can't remember how he knew about the case, but he was a parole officer of some kind, but he wrote a letter that was basically Diane Downs still doesn't believe that she did this crime. She is currently saying, and she changes her story all the time about who the assailants were and were they wearing ski masks, or did they have guns, or were they drug dealers, or she changes her story a ton. Those are all examples of quote unquote stories she's told about it. Psychiatrists diagnosed Downs with antisocial personality disorder, which is often characterized by a weak or non-existent conscience, narcissistic personality disorder, evident in her lack of empathy and desire for attention, and histrionic personality disorder. which is a collection of attention-seeking behaviors, usually involving inappropriate sexual behaviors or actions. Histrionic personality disorder, it's usually diagnosed in women, and it basically, like, I think they diagnose it based on, is this woman doing, like, a lot of sexual things to get attention from men, essentially, because that, like, is what gives them some kind of psychological worth.
Wait, what's it? What
Um,
is it called? What's the disorder?
it's called histrionic, so like Histrionic. So while at a correctional facility in Salem, Diane Downs briefly escaped from detention, and 5 years was added to her sentence for this. The adopter of her children, who also happened to be a prosecutor during the trial, was afraid that she would attempt to make contact with her children while she was escaped, and like there was like amplified security during this time. She eventually got sent back to prison. Another similarity between the two cases is that it's, in both cases, it was like weirdly clear that the men that these women were allegedly killing their children for were like not into a relationship. Like they had made it clear they didn't want to be in a relationship, but supposedly because they had said, "Oh, the reason is because you have children." These women took that as,
Okay,
"Oh,
let me get rid of my
like I'll
children.
just get rid of the children, like easy peasy, lemon squeezy."
Yeah.
But again, like both of them had kind of convinced themselves that if they fixed that small problem, these men would like want them.
I
And
mean, but
that's
it's like that's just
both
a
of them, they needed this attention from these men, and like obviously had very poor relationships with men, and had like a very skewed idea of like where they were getting their emotional support from, I guess.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's pretty much all I got. I thought I'd bring that second one up because it's
It's
weirdly
relevant.
similar. Like it's
Yeah.
weirdly similar, and like there's a lot of similarities that like I don't know, and then I don't know. It's just, again, it's really weird to think about women killing their children, especially for something like a man.
Mhm.
Or
I mean, it's
there's always the Casey Anthony. Anytime I see any killer mom
yes.
case anymore, Casey Anthony is who I think of. And again, that was a case of like a woman, and we all, here's the thing, like she's like the OJ Simpson of killer moms, right? It's like
Mhm.
she technically wasn't convicted, but everybody and their mother knows that she did it. And she did it for like selfish reasons. Like she literally just didn't want to be a mom. She was already a mom, and instead of doing what she should have done, like giving the child up for adoption, she decided to kill this like innocent being
Mhm.
because she wanted to do other shit. Like she wanted to be young, and like I don't think Casey Anthony did it like to specifically be with a certain guy, but like she was doing it because she didn't want to be a mom anymore. And
Yeah.
like in her mind it was like, "Oh, easy. I'll just get rid of the kid, you know?"
Well, and I think too, it's weird for us as relatively sane people to think that it's weird that
Did you
someone
really
killed
just
their.
say relatively?
I mean, we're relatively sane. We're not like.
I feel like, yeah,
No
that's
arguments.
probably a good
I feel like that's.
explanation.
I mean, we're not freaking Susan Smith, insane. But the point is, the point I'm trying to make here is like for us, we would never even fathom like killing our own like flesh and blood, especially your own children.
Mhm.
But clearly these people are not right in the brain. Even if they're not, even if you can't plead like an insanity plea or anything, they're still not all there. Like there's still something like very, very, very wrong. They're deeply troubled individuals, I
Even
guess. That
even
they would even
at
think of, that they would even think, oh yeah, I'll just kill them. Like
well, and
that alone.
even if they are simply just like trash people, which that's like a fair explanation, is that they're just like not good people.
Hmm.
Like they are truly evil, and they that's why they killed their children. I don't know. Again, it's crazy to like even start to imagine why somebody does something like this. But all right, so that's all I've got for you guys this week. We, as always, will be back with another episode on Friday for you guys. We appreciate everybody who has been with us on this journey so far. You guys can make sure to follow us on social media at Who What Where Podcast. That's our Instagram handle, and then you can find us on Facebook, Who What Where Podcast. If you're listening to the YouTube version of this podcast, we'd love if you left us a comment down below. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Any support we seriously appreciate, because we are very much amateurs, and so anybody that has been a loyal listener, that's the idea of that is really cool to me. But yeah, we will see you in the next episode. Thanks so much for listening.